at number 10 is Ted Kaczynski. Ted Unabomber Kaczynski was an anarchist and a mathematical prodigy. He excelled academically from an early age and has an insanely high IQ of 167. He made it into Harvard University at just 16 years old and ultimately gained a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. Now, not too much later, he had become an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but after handing in his resignation, things started to go downhill. The Unabomber became a hermit and moved to a remote cabin in Lincoln, Montana. Between 1978 and 1995, he took the lives of 3 people and injured 23 others with homemade explosive devices. His manifesto was published in the Washington Post after being sent to the press anonymously, and it explained that the devices were extreme but necessary to attract attention to the erosion of human freedom necessitated by modern technologies requiring large-scale organization. I didn't write that, in case you were curious. That wasn't me. Anyways, he was caught when his brother read the letters in the news, recognized Ted's handwriting, and tipped off the FBI. The Unabomber was finally caught and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Number 9. Andrew Cunanan. Andrew Cunanan was incredibly intelligent as well, with an IQ of 147, but Cunanan was also a tactical liar. He would claim that his father was an Israeli millionaire, and he displayed early signs of antisocial personality disorder. To fund the lavish lifestyle that he craved, Cunanan would make friends of wealthy older men, which worked out for him when he moved in with millionaire Norman Blatchford, who treated him to luxury cars and vacations in southern France. But that didn't last, as Blatchford finally had enough of Cunanan and he was thrown out. Now, this hit to his ego led to the passing of at least 5 different people, including Chicago tycoon Lee Miglin and Gianni Versace, on July 15, 1997. In June of 1997, Cunanan became the 449th fugitive to be listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. It wasn't too much longer after the passing of Versace that Andrew's body was discovered in a Miami Beach houseboat, having taken his own life. Number 8. Thomas James Holden. Thomas James Holden was the first man to ever make the most wanted list of the FBI, so he kind of had to make this list. His criminal career began in the 1920s with the robbery of a mail train and didn't stop there at all. In 1930, he escaped from Leavenworth Penitentiary and was recaptured on a golf course in Kansas City. He was on parole in 1949 and drinking with his wife and her 2 brothers when an argument broke out, resulting in Holden taking the life of all 3, then fleeing with the FBI on his trail. He evaded them for quite some time, but the FBI caught him 13 months later after receiving a tip from a man in Oregon. Just a reminder, if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing, make sure to give us a like. It's all we really need to feel your support. Thanks, guys. Number 7. James Earl Ray. While Holden was the first man to make the list, James Earl Ray was the first man to make the most wanted list twice. His first crime is his most famous, as he was first wanted by the FBI for taking the life of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. He was captured 2 months later when a customs official at Heathrow Airport recognized his alias from a Canadian wanted list, but in 1977 he escaped from a Tennessee penitentiary, leading him to be put back on that list. But not for too long, as 3 days later he was recaptured and a year was added to his sentence, bringing it up to a grand total of 100 years, which kinda seems a little pointless, but I get it. Number 6. Victor Manuel Garena. While not the most evil, especially compared to most of the others on this list, Victor Manuel Garena has the longest membership on the FBI's most wanted list. In 1984, Garena was a Wells Fargo security guard who turned on 2 fellow workers in their Wells Fargo armored car. He isn't the most evil because all he did to the 2 other co-workers is tie them up, but he then fled with $7 million taken from the truck and was literally never seen again. To this day, the FBI is still offering a $1 million reward for information leading to his arrest. It would be insane if he happened to actually be caught at this point. Number 5. Omar August Pinson. Omar August Pinson brings us back to the more evil side of things, as he was convicted of slaying an on-duty Oregon police officer before he made a jailbreak. Omar managed to evade capture on the run for almost a year, and even made it out of a shootout in January 1950 with Montana police completely unscathed. The problem for Pinson here came when a car salesman identified him and gave the FBI enough clues to track him down. He was recaptured in September 1950 and returned to prison, making parole in the early 70s. Number 4. William Bradford Bishop Jr. William Bradford Bishop Jr. made the list for pretty brutally taking the life of his wife, mother, and he disappeared in 1976. In the next few years, witnesses claim to have seen him in several different locations overseas, but he still hasn't been caught. Bishop wasn't added to the FBI's most wanted list until 2014 when the Bureau had produced an age-advanced image of him to aid in his capture, but it failed to turn up any leads, and 2 years later he was dropped from the list again. He would now be 84 years old if he is still alive, but we just might not ever know, which is kinda not a great feeling. Number 3. Robert William Fisher. Robert Fisher is actually on the current FBI most wanted list for taking the life of his wife and their 2 children before blowing up the house that they all lived in Scottsdale, Arizona in April 2001. He was described as a cruel and distant control freak towards his family. He and his wife would fight a lot, and Fisher was embarrassed that his son Bobby did not like to hunt or fish, and once tried to teach him and his daughter how to swim by throwing them off of a boat. Fisher was also very controlling about the house they lived in, not allowing the walls in the house to be painted anything other than white, and only a small number of pictures were allowed on the wall. Any sentimental objects of his wife's had to be kept hidden away. He's still out there, so watch out. Number 2. Eduardo Ravello. Guess what? I have another guy who is included on the current FBI's most wanted list, just to keep you a little on your toes, you know? Eduardo Ravello was indicted in Texas in 2008 for his alleged involvement in racketeering activities, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, aka money, and conspiracy to possess substances with the intent to distribute them. His criminal activities began in 2003, and Ravello is known to be a captain within the Barrio Azteca American-Mexican criminal enterprise, and is allegedly responsible for issuing orders to the Barrio Azteca members, who allegedly act as hitmen for an even bigger substance trafficking organization. Apparently, in total, they are responsible for a whole number of lost lives. Ravello himself has ties to Mexico and El Paso, Texas, and it's presumed that he may have had plastic surgery and altered his fingerprints, but he's still out and about at the moment. And in at number 1 is Ted Bundy. I bet you were wondering if more recognizable names would show up on this list. Well, you were right. The vicious serial killer Ted Bundy was actually a 2-time member of the FBI's most wanted list, who committed his first known killing in 1974. Following his first, Bundy unfortunately took 12 more lives during his time until one of his victims escaped, but even then, before he could actually be arrested in 1975, he did it again 5 more times. During his 1977 trial, he escaped from the courthouse through a window and was most wanted for 6 days before recapture, but like I said, he was on that list twice, as later that year he escaped again. He committed 3 more attacks and took 2 more lives before finally being stopped for driving a stolen car. Thankfully, this monster can never escape again, as he was put to the electric chair in 1989.
Coming in at number 10 is the Colonial Parkway Killer. An active criminal between 1986 to 1989, this person specifically targeted couples traveling Virginia's scenic parkway late at night. During that time, 3 couples were found dead and 1 couple went missing but is presumed to have the same fate. A different couple was found each year, leading authorities to question, was this person only killing once a year, or were this just the ones they found? The cases had received major media coverage, including documentaries, news articles, and TV shows as recent as 2021, but despite having over 130 suspects, the FBI have yet to be able to put a name to the face of the crimes. One bizarre piece of this puzzle is that in 2010, a note was discovered in a box taken years earlier from one of the victims' apartments. The note stated that she was to meet someone in a blue van at a rest stop, and when the Virginia State Police was asked about this, they claimed that the note had been previously examined. But in 1989, during the time of the murders, an investigator involved told case reporters that he was unaware of the existence of the note. So, if you ever find yourself driving the scenic route of Virginia, do yourself a favor and don't make a pit stop. Next up at number 9 is Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1996, this killer was added to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's top 10 most wanted list after he escaped from a California prison back in 1987. At the time of his escape, he was serving a 26 to life sentence for the death of Kim LaValle. Trying to hide the body, took her up a mountain and decided to use a homemade explosive in an attempt to make the remains disappear. However, residents of the mountain only a few months later came across some remains, thus sparking his arrest. When he escaped prison in 1987, he fled to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico and joined up with a cartel, but was found and convicted in 1991 and sent to jail in Guadalajara. It was here that he took the life of a fellow inmate and then escaped a second time only 5 months later. Authorities have yet to track him down after 31 years, but it is believed that he is still on the loose today. So keep your eyes peeled if you're ever in Latin America, because the FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for anyone with information that could lead to his arrest. Next up at number 8 is Bible John. Active between 1968 and 1969 in Glasgow, Scotland, the man nicknamed Bible John is believed to be responsible for the death of 3 young women. All 3 of his victims were young brunettes who he would lure in at a local dance hall in the city. The unidentified criminal is referred to as Bible John, as according to a key witness, saw a man who picked up women yet quoted extensively from the Old Testament and frowned on adultery. But of course, taking the lives of young women seemed alright in his books. For decades, the Glasgow police have tirelessly searched for the monster, but have remained unsuccessful in tracking him down. To date, the search for Bible John has been the most extensive manhunt in Scotland criminal history. It was also the first time in Scotland's history that a composite drawing of the perpetrator was allowed and publicized in an attempt to get more information from the public. Although there have been a few suspects over the years, none have been convicted, and to this day it is unknown who is responsible for these horrible attacks. Next up at number 7 is the Monster of Florence. Active between 1968 and 1985 in Florence, Italy, this man is responsible for the death of 8 young couples who he would target while they snuck away into the woods trying to be intimate outside of their homes. Now, in 1970s Italy, this could be a common occurrence, as it was customary for young couples to not live with each other until marriage, and with nowhere else to go, sometimes the great outdoors was their only alternative. The part about this that really gets under your skin is that the female victims would be found mutilated, with their intimate areas removed with, quote, a surgical precision that led police to believe he had a medical background. More than 100,000 men were investigated for these crimes, with some being arrested or even tried, but eventually another killing would occur, exonerating them and forcing police to continue their search. The search continued for this gruesome monster, and a local farmer named Pietro Pacini was convicted in 1994 for 6 of the killings, but later in 1996 it was overturned. Pacini then died a few years later, but it is strongly believed he did not work alone, and while 5 accused men have been sent to jail at one point or another, they were all eventually released, leaving this case wide open with the alleged convict running free. Coming in at number 6, we have the upstairs lounge fire. In June of 1973, a New Orleans gay bar was the victim of the second worst attack on the American queer community, only surpassed in 2016 by the Pulse nightclub massacre. The upstairs lounge was a beloved hub with drag queens and music, but sadly on this 1973 Pride weekend, everything would change. The bar was located on the 2nd floor of the building, and out of nowhere patrons started to smell gasoline, but initially thought nothing of it. A few minutes later, a doorbell rang, and when someone opened to see who was there, a fireball was thrown into the room and immediately erupted the room into an inferno. It is now known the perpetrator used a Molotov cocktail. The fire burned fast, lasting only 20 minutes, but in that time 32 lost their lives and another 15 were severely injured by the attack. The survivors of the fire were taken to identify the bodies of those who died in the tragedy, but according to one survivor, many of the identified bodies remained unclaimed by family members as they were ashamed and wanted nothing to do with their gay kin. After the attacks, many survivors refused to show their faces, afraid of the homophobia that would follow due to the media coverage. No arrests were ever made, and it's very likely that whoever committed this atrocity continues to walk the streets of New Orleans to this day. Next up at number 5, the Stoneman. Active between the years of 1985 to 1988 in Mumbai, India, this mysterious criminal was never caught. Believed to be responsible for the death of 26 people, the Stoneman got their name due to their cruel methods. The Stoneman would target homeless people sleeping alone on the streets at night and used concrete blocks or stones, sometimes weighing up to 65 pounds, to carry out their gruesome plan. According to the media, 12 people died at the hands of the Stoneman in Mumbai, India between 1985 to 1988, and then they moved to Calcutta, where another 12 people were found dead in a single year. Now, it's not known for sure if the Calcutta killer was the same as whoever committed the atrocities in Mumbai. Authorities did mention it could have been a copycat, but most seem to believe it was all one person, or at least a group of people working together. No one has been charged for any of the crimes, and all remain unsolved. Coming in at number 4, the Doodler. This next criminal was from San Francisco and active for just 1 year between 1974 to 1975. However, in that year, the unidentified killer is believed to have taken 16 lives. He was known to target specifically white men in gay clubs and got his name as he was known to sit around doodling pictures of them to draw them in. Once they got to talking, he would lure them elsewhere, like a lake or a park, and follow through with the rest of his evil plan. Unfortunately, due to the rampant homophobia of the time, when police did find a suspect for the case, they couldn't proceed with criminal charges, as none of the 3 surviving victims of the brutal attacks felt safe to out themselves publicly by testifying in court, fearful of how the consequences might impact their daily lives. The case remains open with no known suspect of who committed the crimes, and in 2019 the police offered a $100,000 reward to anyone with more information of the killer. Next up at number 3, the CRAIGSLIST Ripper. Also known as the Long Island Killer, this man is thought to be responsible for the death of 17 people between the years of 1996 to 2010, and got his name as he was known to target women of the night who advertised their services on Craigslist. Although his crimes began in 1996, none of his victims were found until 2010, many wrapped up in sacks or garbage bags along the Long Island shore. It's speculated that he may have been, or that he currently is, a police officer, as whoever committed these crimes seemed to have an in-depth knowledge of the investigation techniques not typically known by just anyone. Sadly, of the 17 found, only 5 have been able to be properly identified due to the nature of how he left the bodies. Coming in at number 2, the Zodiac Killer. Possibly the most famous repeat convict known to date, this criminal is as scary as it gets. Active in California during the late 60s and early 70s, the Zodiac Killer seemed to get off on the chase, sending in letters and highly encrypted clues to the police that supposedly would reveal his identity, and more, if only the puzzles could be deciphered. Not only would he send in cards to the police, but he was known to mail in his taunting clues to local newspapers, threatening awful consequences if they were not printed. There are 7 known victims that he is known to be responsible for, 2 surviving his brutal attacks, although he claims to have killed 37. The especially creepy part about this particular monster is that, as detailed in his letters, he believed that all those whose life he ended would become his slaves in the afterlife, and that he would be sent to paradise. Although the Zodiac ceased all written communication by 1974, the case remained open since 1969, with no known perpetrator. And last up in our number 1 spot, ISSEI Sagawa. Nicknamed the Kobe Cannibal, this monster is not for the faint of heart. Now, unlike others on the list, he's only known for 1 brutal attack, but what he did will leave you speechless. Sagawa was born in Japan and says he had known since childhood of his gruesome instincts, but for whatever reason would always back out of his desires at the last second. All of this changed, however, when he moved to Paris to pursue his PhD. It was there that he met Renee Hartvelt, one of his classmates who he decided was the right victim. Sagawa says he picked her due to her beauty and stature, as he saw himself as weak, ugly, and small, and believed that he could absorb her energy. He invited her over on the pretense of a dinner, but knew all along what he planned to do. He had it thought out. He took the woman's life, and I'm sure you can imagine what he did with her body considering the monster's name. After 4 days, the body began to decompose, and he knew that he had to get her out of his apartment or risk being arrested for his crimes. However, he was caught attempting to dispose of her remains in a nearby lake by French authorities and was, of course, arrested immediately. After awaiting trial for 2 years, a judge ruled him legally insane and unfit for trial, ordering him to live out the rest of his life in a mental institution. He was deported out of France and sent back to Japan, where he was immediately committed. But here's where it gets crazy. Once in this institution, the psychologist deemed him fully sane, and that his perversions were the reason for his crimes, not insanity. But since his charges had been dropped while in France, all documents were sealed and nothing was sent to Japanese authorities, meaning that legally, the institution could not detain him any longer. After only 2 years away from society, Sagawa walked out freely and remains free to this day.
Starting off this countdown, we have Eugene Paul killed him and took off with his cash and car. Turns out Hazel wasn't who she said she was. No shocker. In fact, she had over 25 different aliases. She's also been married 10 times and is wanted in Lincoln, Nebraska. The last time anyone saw her was in December of 1998 when she was spotted in a truck stop near Wheat Ridge, Colorado. She hasn't been spotted since. If she's alive to this day, she would be in her 70s. In our 4th spot today, we have Alvin Scott. Alvin Scott is wanted in a double murder. In August of 2001, his wife left him and was living with a male friend in the meantime, and Alvin did not like this. On the day of their divorce proceedings, Alvin stalked the two and killed them both. Alvin has more than a decade's experience in military training and was an experienced PI, so he was able to stalk the two and shoot and kill them from his car. He then fled and has been on the run ever since. It's believed that he has multiple fake passports and multiple fake identities, and due to his experience in the military, he's been hard to track. He is one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives, and there's a $100,000 reward for any leads on his whereabouts. In our 3rd spot today, we have Joe Matthew Constance. On June 5th, 2011, Joe Matthew Constance broke into his ex-wife's house looking for her. However, she was not there. There were, however, other people there, so he threatened them with a gun, being like, "Tell me where she is or I'll kill you." They did not reveal where his wife was. So Joe searched the whole house and eventually did find her on the property. He then shot and killed her before fleeing. He was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and aggravated burglary. However, he's still never been caught. There is a $20,000 reward out there for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of Joe. Moving on to number 2, we have Jason Derek Brown. On November 29, 2004 in Phoenix, Arizona, Jason Derek Brown shot and killed an armored car guard outside of a movie theater before fleeing with the money. Since 2004, he has been wanted for murder and armed robbery. Now, Jason portrayed himself as a wealthy man, but in reality, he was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. This was his motive for the murder and robbery. If he's still alive, he would be 52. FBI has made it clear that Jason is armed and very dangerous. There is a $200,000 reward for anyone who can provide information on Brown's whereabouts. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Badrush Kumar Patel. After getting married in India, Badrush Kumar and his wife Palak left their home country to start a new life in the United States. In fact, they both got jobs at Dunkin' Donuts and they worked together. On April 12th of 2015, while working a night shift, Palak was on the phone with her family, crying, saying that she wanted to go back to India. In fact, the pair's visas had expired. A while later, he led her to a back room in the store and stabbed her multiple times. This was after the two had an argument. She wanted to go home to India and he wanted to stay in the US. After taking his wife's life, he fled the scene. Now, customers at the store grew concerned after they realized that no one was in the store to serve them. A police officer just so happened to be nearby and decided to check out the scene. That's when he found Palak. Badrush Kumar has been on the run ever since. A $100,000 reward is available to anyone who can provide information leading to his arrest.